OpenAI's new Strawberry model, or O1 model, has been out for a little while, and it is taking the world by storm, but is it actually good for creative writing? That's what I'm going to dive into today. There are some things that are good and some things that are definitely not so great about this model, so stay tuned so you can know which is which, and I'll walk you through it. So ideally, I wanted to make this video a long time ago, but I was actually in the hospital for a couple of days, and so that kind of set me back a little bit. I apologize for that. But I do have a couple of tests that I've run recently, quite a few tests that I wanted to show off for you today using OpenAI's new O1 model inside of ChatGPT mostly. Now, the big thing that I've noticed here with just observing the chatter around this model is that there are some people that have been absolutely blown away by it, and it's like their new favorite model, and other people that say it's actually an awful model at creative writing, and I'm genuinely surprised by this. What that tells me is that there are probably some differences in how you prompt this model as compared to other models. And some of the prompting techniques that you would use with O1 should be different from the prompting techniques that we have been using in the past with Claude 3 and all of the other models that we've been using. And we know this is the case because they've actually recommended different types of prompting. For instance, chain of thought prompting is no longer necessary with O1 because it essentially does chain of thought reasoning all on its own without us needing to prompt it to do so. And this is one of the things that is slightly controversial about the O1 model, is that it spends a lot of time reasoning, and that does seem to create better results in most instances. But the problem with that is that you have to pay for that reasoning. You don't get to see the reasoning that it gives you. It doesn't tell you any of that reasoning, but it will charge you for it. And that's one of the big things that a lot of people are unhappy with this model, is it is extremely expensive. And I've done most of my prompts inside of my paid account for ChatGPT because I didn't want to go through OpenRouter or any of the other options because of how expensive it was. Even one simple prompt in OpenRouter cost me about 20 cents. And that's actually quite a lot for a single prompt. You're going to be racking up your bills if you're constantly doing 20-cent prompts. You're going to be having a very expensive book on your hands if you're writing a whole book with that model. Now in ChatGPT, I'm able to work with the model as much as I can, given the limitations that they have. They do cut you off eventually if you've been overusing it, but at least I know I'm not going to be spending more than my $20 a month in ChatGPT. So let's actually get into all of the tests that I ran. Some of them were surprisingly amazing and some were not. So let's start with my stock ad headline. I have this prompt that I use consistently to test that says, give me 20 Facebook ad headlines to sell a book about food addiction, a personal memoir talking about how someone overcame food addiction and the benefit they received. Very simple prompt. I'm not trying to give it examples of good headlines or anything like that because I want to see if it can do it on its own without all of that help. And so it gave me a couple of good ones. Discover one woman's, or in my case, one man's journey to conquer food addiction, how to overcome food addiction, how overcoming food addiction changed my life. That's actually not a bad one right there. It's a little simple, but you could start with that one for sure. Break free, one person's path out of food addiction unveiled, a memoir of recovery, learn how I conquered food addiction. That one does a decent job with curiosity there. My battle with food addiction and how I won. Find hope in the fight against food addiction. So we got a bunch of them here. From what I can tell, this is definitely better than what I've seen from other models, because other models tend to give very generic and not really great headlines that don't really have the curiosity factor and the hook factor and all of those things. These aren't great either, but they are better. It is definitely a step in the right direction. Some of them I do actually quite like. Probably my favorite one is my battle with food addiction and how I won. Definitely got the curiosity factor there. And I just like the way it's written overall. So that's headlines. I think that's decent. Let's do a nonfiction article thing here. It wrote this article for me really quickly. This is based on Helen of Troy, based on a couple of, a huge prompt that I gave it with examples and stuff like that. Let's take a look. Firstly, let's look at the word count here. All right, so that ended up being about 1,200 words. I asked it for more. I asked it for about 4,000, but I don't believe that ChatGPT just really allows it to have really long outputs. In fact, 1,200 is about the maximum that I'm usually able to get out of ChatGPT. I've never really gotten more than that, so I think this is actually decent. I could instead ask it to write maybe the first half of the article and then just ask it to write the second half, and I'd be fine there, and it would give me a little bit more detail on each of these sections. So that's not too bad. And then just reading the text of the article, let's say the etymology of Helen's name. The name Helen has been a subject of fascination and debate among scholars of classical studies. It seems like a superfluous sentence there. Derived from the ancient Greek name Helene, some interpretations link it with the word Helene, meaning torch or corposant, symbolizing light or beauty. Others suggest connections to Selene, the goddess of the moon, hinting at a divine aspect to Helen's beauty. Understanding the etymology offers insights into how ancients perceived this remarkable Greek woman. Here's another superfluous sentence that isn't really necessary. So it's not perfect. I would say I definitely get better results out of Claude 3.5 Sonnet than I do here, but I might just need to refine my prompting techniques. All in all, it's okay. It's better than other GPT models for sure, but needs a little work. It did do a good job of just sticking to the outline that I gave it. It looks like an easily scannable article and other things that you would want in an online article to make it more accessible. So I definitely liked that about it, but it's definitely got room for improvement. Then I asked it for my standard log lines prompt. So the prompt is give me 20 log lines for a sci-fi beach romance story, of course, in the style recommended by Blake Snyder that includes the following elements. And I gave it the elements and I say it should be about 25 to 30 words to concisely capture the essence of the story. And here it gives me a couple of different things. So we have, when a lonely marine biologist discovers a shape-shifting alien on a remote beach, she must help him repair his ship before government agents capture them, falling in love in the process. Okay, that one's a bit generic and very similar to other things I've gotten from other models. A lifeguard discovers her new summer fling, and a time-traveling soldier from the future must decide whether to help him stop an impending disaster or lose him forever. On a futuristic beach resort, a human tour guide falls for an android designed to replace her and must prove her worth before she is made obsolete. That one's better than some of the other ones that I've seen. A little bit more interesting and topically relevant in the age of AI these days. A marine archaeologist uncovers an underwater city where she meets a man claiming to be from another planet. Together they must prevent Earth's oceans from being harvested by aliens. After downloading a mysterious app at a beach party, a tech-savvy teen communicates with a boy from a parallel universe, but their growing love threatens to collapse reality. So overall, from these examples, they're not much better. Some of them are, I think, a little bit better than what I'm typically used to seeing out of these models, but overall not too great and definitely not worth the huge cost of these models. So if you're using a model for brainstorming, for creative ideas, I would probably look at a different model because the brainstorming, and I'll talk about outlining a little bit later, outlining has not been great with this model, at least not to the point where it's worth using for the cost. I'd say there is a marginal improvement over some of the models out there, even some of the better models like Gemini and Claude 3.5. But overall, is it worth the massive increase in cost for this particular model for brainstorming issues in particular? I don't think so. I just don't think it's good enough for that yet. But these aren't bad. They're just not amazing. All right, the next thing I wanted to know is, would this actually do a decent job at editing my text? Now, again, this is something you're going to have to be thinking in terms of cost, because if it's editing and then rewriting the entire text that you give it, by the time you finish editing an entire book, you will have spent probably over $100 or something in terms of how much you're able to edit. So keep cost in mind, but I wanted to see, can it edit well? Because this is supposed to be a reasoning AI tool or AI model, and strikes me as that editing would be a good use case for something that can reason well. And so I gave it this prompt. I said, the following is text generated with AI. You are an expert line editor. Please make improvements on this AI generated text to make it sound more human. I think this is something a lot of us would want. And then I gave it this. This is the first chapter in the sci-fi beach romance that I wrote completely with prompts. So it's not a very good chapter because it was written with zero human input at all. And so I thought if it can make this sound a little bit better, it might be, we might be onto something. So we have the original text, and I believe this was originally written with Claude 3.5 Sonnet, or possibly just Claude 3 Sonnet. It might not have been 3.5 yet at the time when I wrote this. I don't quite remember. But we have the warm golden light of the setting sun danced across the water as Sarah and I walked hand in hand along the beach. Her laughter, like the gentle chime of bells, mingled with the soothing rhythm of the waves lapping against the shore. I couldn't help but steal glances at her, marveling at the way the fading light seemed to make her glow. Remember our first date? Sarah asked, a mischievous twinkle in her hazel eyes. I chuckled the memory as if it had happened yesterday. How could I forget? I was so nervous I spilled coffee all over myself. So you can see very AI generated, very like over the top melodramatic. And here is what it gave me after its reasoning. As the sun set, casting warm golden light over the water, Sarah and I walked hand in hand along the beach. Her laughter mixed with the gentle sounds of the waves hitting the shore. I kept stealing glances glances at her, amazed at how the fading light made her seem to glow. It cut back significantly at all of that preamble that we had at the beginning of that chapter. And then it says, remember our first date, Sarah asked, a playful sparkle in her hazel eyes. That's more or less the same. I laughed, the memory was clear as day. How could I forget? I was so nervous I spilled coffee all over myself. She giggled and gave my hand a squeeze. And then you tried to pretend it was the latest fashion trend. Hey, it worked, didn't it? You stuck around, I teased, pulling her closer. So it still has a little bit of that AI-ness to it, just because the source material was very AI generated. But I definitely think there have been some major improvements to this, at least this first section of the text. And if you keep reading, you'll find that is the case. It does seem to be a much better version of the text than the original. So in terms of taking AI generated text and making it a little bit better, just automatically, I think it does really well there. And that could be a very good use case for this particular model. The only downside, again, is the cost, because if you're constantly rewriting everything with this model and the output tokens are so expensive for this, it's going to cost you quite a lot of money to actually make this work. Now, if that's not an issue for you, then go right ahead and it'll probably make your text a lot better. I did another test using human written words. This is something that I wrote myself and basically did a very similar prompt. I said, you are an expert line editor. Please analyze the following text and make it better. And then I gave it just a short snippet of text from one of my books that I personally wrote. So this is not AI generated text. In this one, it actually gave me a slight analysis of the text, said consistency in character names. The name Vivian is spelled Vivienne with an E in some places. Choose one spelling for consistency. And that's something I didn't notice before. So that's, yeah, and this book has been proofread too. So the proofreader didn't notice it either. So that's something I can definitely act on. And then it says some sentences are lengthy and could be broken up for better readability. For example, the second sentence is quite long and could be split. And it gave me a couple of other things here. And then the revised text goes something like this. The tear in the fabric of time was beautiful but deadly. The fairy queen regarded it coolly. Her eyes reflected the light streaming from the tear, casting a dancing golden green pattern across the trees surrounding the dark clearing. The spectacle was even more glorious at night, but Gloriana knew that nothing beautiful would come of today's events. So this particular sentence, I'm not going to go through and compare it side by side, but I'll just tell you right now, this is a little bit better. It split up some of the sentences that it talked about, the run-on sentences, and it just made it flow slightly better. But then as I kept reading, we get to some dialogue here. When you said you needed help, said the voice beside her, I never knew it was this bad. Gloriana glanced to one side, temporarily ignoring the ever-expanding breach. It would still be a few moments before it was large enough for anything to come through. Vivian, she said to the woman by her side. The woman greeted her with a nod. Well, she was more of a girl, really, with long blonde hair and a little lithe body, clothed in white robes. The last time she'd seen Vivian, she'd kept her hair short. All of this was pretty much exactly as I wrote it. It made hardly any changes there, maybe some slight grammatical changes. So I didn't see anything major. And again, because of the cost of this, it wouldn't necessarily be worth it to me to run the whole book through this model in this way. However, it did do a good job where it did make changes. I think the changes were for the better. And so that's the cost opportunity ratio that you're going to have to work with is it worth the cost to make this a little bit better? But I do think it makes it marginally better. It's just how much better and is it worth it for you? That's just the thing you're going to have to deal with. All right, the next thing I wanted to test is a Novel Crafter prompt. So I basically came here to Novel Crafter and I took these beats right here. That's supposed to be for the opening of this sci-fi beach romance that I wrote. Now I've already gone over some of that text that was originally written, but I decided I wanted to try rewriting that scene. So I added all of the beats here, and this is supposed to be a lengthy section of the prose. And so I went to my prompt here that I called General Purpose Super, and I went to Preview Final Prompt, and then I just copied the prompt that it's going to run here. So rather than run it in Novel Crafter, I just copied the prompt and took it over into ChatGPT and put it here. So it's a very lengthy super prompt here. We've got some style information here. We got it taking in the codex. So it's got information on the characters here and their vocal mannerisms and everything there, their personalities, the location of the beach that they're on, the location of the lighthouse that they're on, all of this background information, more style information here. And then this is important. I said, here's a sample chapter of my prose style. Please use the same prose style. And it has a whole section here that is just copied and pasted from another book that I wrote with my own work. And it's a pretty lengthy part of this prompt, just putting in the sample chapter here. Then it gives information about what the actual scene should be, and the scene beats are included here, and then just some last minute messaging there. And then it went through, took that super prompt and wrote out the first good chunk of the story. The number of words it wrote was 800, which I would have ideally liked maybe a little bit longer, but 800 was okay to start with. And so I started reading it, and it says, "The sun warmed our faces as Sarah and I lay sprawled on the golden sand, the waves whispering secrets to the shore." That phrase I don't really care for, but if we continue, "She turned her head toward me, her hazel eyes dancing with mischief. Bet you can't find a single cloud up there," she challenged, pointing at the flawless blue sky. I smirked. "You're on." Scanning the heavens dramatically, I feigned deep concentration. Nope, looks like you win this round. Now that seems like a bit of a that doesn't sound supernatural there. Like you're looking at a clear sky and you say, "Bet you can't find a cloud," like that just didn't sound too natural to me. However, as I kept reading, and just particularly with the dialogue here, it says, "She laughed, a sound that blended perfectly with the ocean's melody. Told you, loser buys dinner. Fine, but don't expect gourmet," I teased. "My culinary skills are limited to canned soup and toast." "Who said anything about cooking? We're picking up fish and chips from the pier." I grinned. "Deal." A comfortable silence settled between us. Sarah reached over and absentmindedly brushed a stray hair from my forehead. "Your hair has a mind of its own," she remarked, her fingers lingering for a moment. "Occupational hazard of being a lighthouse keeper," I replied. "The wind up there doesn't exactly encourage neatness." She sat up, wrapping her arms around her knees. "Speaking of the lighthouse, have you ever thought about what it would be like to live anywhere else?" I pondered her question. "The lighthouse is more than just a place to me. It's a constant in a world that's always changing." "I get that. Stability can be comforting." I looked at her curiously. "Something on your mind?" "Sometimes I worried about..." Anyway, so going on, it had a whole lot of dialogue, more than I'm used to seeing from GPT models. And while it's not perfect, as you can clearly see, this is probably the best I've ever seen from a GPT model, especially in terms of the natural banter that I got between the characters. It just felt so much better. And it felt like a much more natural opening to this scene compared to the Claude models that I was using in the original here in Novel Crafter that you can see here that we covered already. So I do think it is actually better at prose, but only when you kind of work with it well and make sure you're giving it sample chapters and things like that. Because I did another test. This time I went through and actually just had it create an outline. So I gave it this simple prompt: "Give me a chapter by chapter outline for a sci-fi colonization book. It should be a slice of life book about the captain of the USS Argo, a colonization ship that is on a multi-decade mission to explore the galaxy, search for alien life, and eventually find places to colonize. The structure of the novella should follow a similar structure to a typical Star Trek The Next Generation episode." So that's all I gave it. I didn't give it information about the characters or anything like that. I just decided to let that go. The only thing I really gave it was the name of the ship, the USS Argo. And it gave me this 10 chapter outline here, which wasn't bad, but definitely wasn't amazing. Again, this is an example of the brainstorming side of things. I think you'd be better off with one of the models that is more well known to be good at brainstorming, like Gemini 1.5 Pro, rather than spend massive amounts of money on this reasoning model here, O1, which doesn't really give you amazing results for outlining. However, it wasn't bad. So I then asked it, I said, "Now flesh out chapter 1 with 16 scene beats to flesh out the chapter." And it gave me the scene beats. And once again, same deal. They're kind of okay, maybe slightly better than what we've had in the past, but probably not worth the price. And then I said, right now, write the first 3 of those scene beats in third person limited in the style of a best-selling sci-fi book. And from there, it gave me chapter 1, Departure into the Unknown. Earth hung like a sapphire jewel against the velvet backdrop of space, its oceans gleaming under the sun's gentle caress. From this vantage point, the scars of the past were invisible. Gone were smoke-choked cities and barren wastelands. Instead, vast swathes of green indicated rejuvenated forests and glittering networks of solar arrays stretched across continents like intricate tattoos, symbols of a planet healed and thriving. Kind of a GPT-ish there, not the best prose. And as I went down, and it was okay, the dialogue was okay, but I've seen better from other models, but it wasn't too bad. So I said in the next prompt, I said, "Try again, but analyze this sample writing and write it in the same style as this sample." Then I gave a sample chapter of my book right here, as you can see. Totally different book, different genre even, but it's at least an example of my writing. And here it gave me a new version of the text. It said, "Earth hung suspended in the velvet embrace of space, a radiant orb of blues and greens swirled with the wisps of white cloud. From the observation deck of the USS Argo, the planet looked serene, whole. The scars of past conflicts and environmental ruin were invisible from this vantage point. Instead, sprawling networks of solar arrays glittered across continents, and orbital habitats dotted the space around her, silent guardians of a united world. Captain Alexander Reynolds stood alone, his hands clasped behind his back, gazing through the expansive viewport. The vastness of space had always called to him, but now, on the cusp of humanity's greatest greatest journey. He felt a weight settle on his shoulders. The Argo was more than a ship. It was a beacon of hope, a vessel carrying the inspirations of every soul on Earth. Let's move forward a little bit. He finally turned to face her fully. Are we chasing knowledge or are we running from something? She raised an eyebrow. Second thoughts, Captain? Not about the mission, he said quickly, but I can't help but think that we're leaving behind. Families, friend, an entire world depending on us. Responsibility comes with command, she reminded him gently, and if anyone's up to the task, it's you. He gave a short laugh. Always the voice of confidence. She smiled. It's part of my charm. And so once again, I thought the dialogue was better than anything I've seen out of a GPT model before. It was really good, and it was significantly better when I gave it a sample of my writing. And I want to just make sure that's clear. I think that that was one of the things that made this much better. If I've learned anything from my testing so far, it's that giving it a sample does improve the output of what it gives you. And so I would recommend doing that. All in all, I find it to be better on almost every account from past GPT models, and even in some cases better than the Claude models, which have clearly been my favorite for a long time. The only thing I would say you need to be careful with is just how costly it is. So is the benefit of the model worth the cost for you? If not, then you might want to stick with the other models. It's not so amazingly better as to completely erase anything else that I would have used instead. I would probably still default to Claude 3.5 Sonnet for myself, just because I like to have a lot of fine-tuned control over things. And so, but that said, I might still try to use this model here and there where I think it could be useful to have just a little bit more oomph in my text, maybe at the beginning of a novel or something like that. It does a good job, and with just a little bit of editing and stuff, I think you could actually create a pretty good chapter here using these techniques that I've showed you. So I hope that was useful for you. Let me know if there are any other tests that you want me to run through O1 to see if it does any better than other things, and talk about it here on the channel, and I will see you in the next video.